What he needs to learn is his decision-making process. You want to take Latin? Why do you think that's a good idea? What is it that makes you think this would be a good fit for you? What skills do you need to succeed in Latin? What abilities do you need to successfully play in the basketball team? And get your child in tune with their own problem solving so that you can maybe ask questions in order to help them refine it. Because so long as you are eager to step in and do the thinking for them, you shouldn't do it and here's why, they don't learn to do the thinking. And when you tell them things, I don't think you should because of this, they perceive that as you trying to control them. And for a child that always feels out of control, they desperately want to feel in control. And they don't want anybody controlling them. But the way you can kind of reverse that and make it safer, don't make statements, ask questions. Oh, you want to take Latin? Tell me about this class. It sounds interesting. Who's teaching it? What are you going to learn? You think it's going to be difficult? How much studying you're going to have to put in? Because by doing that, you're making yourself the student. You're making them the expert. And it's a lot easier to engage them. Because in asking your questions and educating you, they have to think it through more. And at the point at which they get frustrated and don't want to talk about it, you realize they're not thinking it through. They just have this wonderful vision of, well, this is a neat idea, I'll just do it.
Well, I know this. Your child is having a rough time. Anyone who thinks the child is a failure or he thinks he's a failure, just look into their heart and you'll find he's not much of what he is. There's a good kid inside of there and you know it.
There's a wonderful quote that I heard. I apologize to the author of it because I don't remember the person's name. But the quote is, failure is an event, not a person. So whenever someone says, oh, I'm a failure, really? That is something that occurred. It's not something that you are. It's maybe an outcome that didn't go quite as you planned, but it's not something you are. And one thing I taught Zachary earlier on is that things don't go wrong in life, they just go different. Because you have your plans at the beginning of each day of how you're intending it to go, but as we know, life kind of has its own way of being whatever it darn well pleases.
I know because I know that I have to deal with them. Whatever changes I have to take, I shall not panic. And that I will, man.
Well, it's okay. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Why don't you panic when unexpected things happen anymore?
Well, I need to know how to control them. Well, sometimes I don't like the way things go, but that's life. You need to deal with them. Your child panics. Don't try and use attitude on him. Just try and find out the problem. Well, if he's in a violent mood like I usually was when I was 7 or 8, don't give him attitude or else they'll get more violent. Just use calm manners. Ask him what it would take to calm him down.
From the mouths of babes.
From a failure standpoint, part of it's quite verbal and quite apparent, that my son has these feelings that he, when he does the slightest thing wrong or relates to homework or anything, but especially school stuff, things that are not even bad, or or you have to, you're his parent. That's what parents do. You have to critique, whether it's, it should be constructive, but it's like, okay, well, no, this one's spelled wrong, you forgot the capital, let's go over this kind of stuff. There are days where you can just do it, and there are other days where it just freaks him out that you have to correct him. All students have to be corrected when they're doing it, he has to learn it. That would be one situation, but the failure thing, he'll get, he'll be stopped in the head, or kill myself, he said before, and I don't think
Does that sound familiar?
Okay, maybe you can tell me. I don't think he really means it, but I know he's showing me his distress, and of course it's very distressing for me to hear it. What I want to know is how to let him know that, he has to be able to take the constructive criticism, and he has to realize that life isn't that bad. He puts all this negative stuff, I know you're talking about that, but be able to accept life as it is and hear what other people have to say as well. You know, people hear him, people hear his distress, I think he's in a pretty good situation at school where a lot of accommodations are met for him. But he can't, what my concern is he has to learn that it can't always go his way.
We could spend an entire day on everything you just said. So I'll trade some, let me talk to you. First of all, constructive criticism is an oxymoron. Okay, so we're not gonna try and give that to our children. What we're gonna do is give them constructive feedback, constructive input. And again, asking questions as opposed to making statements. When you say you did something wrong, these kids are subjective. They hear it as I'm wrong, I'm bad. You need to make it about the spelling, not about him.
Right, well, what I think I used to probably do that, so I'm like, okay, look at number 6, what do you see there? I try to do it that way. And he will find it, but if there's, 3 or 4 in a row that he's found, he still gets very upset with himself. I get upset in that I want him to learn to read what he's written. Because, I don't know if writing is difficult for you. It's part of it's a motor skill, brain to hand thing. So writing is difficult for him, but going into middle school, I'm not sure where your son's strengths lie from that point. You can't get around writing.
Yes, you can.
Remember how
Okay? My writing consists of the grocery list and signing my name.
Well, even typing though. I mean, even on the computer, because I allow him to whatever he can put that way.
And one thing you're gonna realize is the Q&A preference that I have here allows me to indulge my tangential thinking. So we kind of go off many different directions. It is so important to understand your child's learning style. There are children that are so auditory that they need to engage through the spoken word. So putting a whole lot of emphasis on the written word may be an excruciating task you don't want to put so much energy into.
Well, it is excruciating. I definitely agree with that.
So that's something to look at, is if the learning style is just so precise that you're barking up the wrong tree. You need to be able to write the essay question. No, you need to be able to speak it. If your child works so much better at hearing the words than seeing them, that's how the child needs to be able to construct things. I've had children, clients of mine, that their essays are spoken to somebody who writes them down. Every question is asked of them orally and they give it back. When they study at home for the test, one parent sits next to them, asks them questions, and they answer because they're so auditory that if they looked at the words on the page, wouldn't go in.
And going from the school setting, this might concern he's that age. I want, he has a lot of accommodation now, and he has an aide, and the aide does scribe a lot for him, and it kind of freaks me out that what is he gonna do as time goes on? I don't know how much accommodation continues between her and you.
He's gonna do what another auditory person did and found a way to be able to talk all the time for a living. These kids kind of find these kids kind of find their way. The kids that are computer junkies find their way into computer programming and game design and web design. They find their way.
So to that point, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is when's the right time for, how do we get him to build his own set of controls so he knows he boxes in his challenges. I'll give you a perfect example. Our son, will get on the computer. The next thing you know, it's 2 in the morning. And then in the morning, when he doesn't wake up, do we give him the ride to school or do we let him be late? It's the simple traits where you're trying to teach, okay, I know this is what I'm obsessed with, I know this is what I love, but there's a time to go to bed. So that when he's out of the house, he can do that on his own. How did you figure that out?
Well, the first question for him is, why is the computer so important? People don't do things in life because. You do it because it satisfies a need. You're hungry, you get something to eat. Thirsty, you get something to drink. What does the computer give him?
An outlet, I think.
Gives him immediate feedback, gives him predictable, concrete outcomes. You know the rules of the game. Rules don't change. You know what you're supposed to be doing. You know the steps. When you do something right, hurrah! Cannon fire, fireworks. When you do something wrong, what happens? Game over. You restarted. It doesn't say, shame on you. That's negative behavior.
Well, some of them do. And it freaks them out at first.
And those are the kids that swear at the console and if the game gives them that kind of feedback. But the bottom line is, the video game gives them the consistent structure, predictability that the rest of the world doesn't. And the more the larger world doesn't work for them, the more they're gonna love that game. So it's not a matter of getting them off the game, it's helping them realize what need that game meets so that they can learn to construct those needs outside of the gaming world.
You know, I have a question. The school is not a controllable environment, period. I
No
remember a
kidding.
few years ago in a MAP conference in Indianapolis, I'm sure several of your friends even, made the observation that the most bullied they'd ever been, and it was to a man, every single person in that room said it was a teacher that bullied them.
Yep.
So they have no control over that environment. And the other thing is, I remember sitting in a room in another one of those sessions with the lights turned so dim you could hardly see the person next to you because the speaker was unable to speak if the lights were bright enough, okay? So bright that you couldn't focus on what was happening. These are things beyond the control of people, period. Everybody has something, I'm sure, in their life. A certain sound, like fingers on the blackboard drive people crazy, okay? That's not controllable. How would you change the system? The
Well, let me
schools,
simplify
the
it.
school system in particular, okay?
The environment that you go into may not be in your control, but the way you take care of yourself in that environment is within your control.
Not really, though.
Yes,
Yeah,
it
it
is.
No.
When I go into, first of all, school is school. School is not life. It's a very unique environment that you will not find anyplace else once you leave school. That's one of the things that makes it so difficult to deal with. When I go to the gym, I can either wear my music to block out that cacophony of sound, or I cannot work out. When I go to the grocery store, I can keep my head down to avoid the lights, and I can have my music on to avoid everything else coming in, or I just wouldn't shop.
And what do you do in the classroom? Put on your iPad to block out the teacher because the sound of her voice is so irritating that you can't stand it, you're melting down?
Why not?
Well, because they won't let you do that, okay? That would not be an acceptable thing.
Then you know what
Like I
happens?
said,
I
those-
get brought into an IEP meeting to explain to the teachers what this child's going
And the
through.
problem with that is that the teachers don't have the experience or knowledge to carry out the IEP.
That's why we're here.
Well, you're teaching us, but you're not teaching, my question was, how would you change the system itself, okay, to accommodate the needs of autistic kids? When the
One
girl who has
school
to
at a
sit in the
time.
classroom with the bright lights, she has to sit in the classroom with the bright lights, that's period, that's no choice,
Mhm.
okay? So what's the accommodation the system has to make for our kids so that they can function within the system?
Well, first, it has to happen on both sides. It has to happen with increasing the child's self-awareness of what doesn't work for them. That it's the lights causing the headache. That it's a student brushing up against them and their sensitivity to light touch, that's overwhelming. But when I have raised these same questions to the school, they come at me with that it's about the many as opposed to the few. We need to accommodate the majority as opposed to the few. In my opinion, if you're not teaching the majority to be sensitive to the few, you are kind of reinforcing discrimination,
Absolutely.
okay? So, in terms of the lights, I say let the kids wear sunglasses in class.
Absolutely. This is a problem, though, because the problem with everything you're saying, okay, these accommodations and these self-esteem issues are what they are, okay? You can put these things in IEPs, but the problem is that they're not carried out to begin with. And the second thing is, there's no concept of autism in the school system in general, okay? And that goes from
I'm right
K
there with
through
you.
12.
That's why I do what I do.
Yeah.
Please keep in mind that I was invited here by a member of the school staff who realized that knowledge is lacking and needs to be acquired so that the school can become more enlightened in what it's like for your kids so that they can begin to change the system. And,
Would you bring parents into the process, Brian?
oh, absolutely.
How would you bring them in?
How would,
How would you bring them into the process itself? I know you're sitting here listening to a speech, but how would you bring parents in on a daily basis to explain to the school system what these particular kids need in this system?
Well, first and foremost, you have to come down, get together, the teachers and the parents in the same room, and help them get to know your child as an individual, not as a label.
Right.
Because it is far too often that you have the child that's an IEP as opposed to a child that's a human being. It's very similar to when I was being treated for cancer. The doctor that was overseeing my care knew my chart. He didn't know me. He knew my diagnosis, knew my symptoms, knew the meds I was taking, didn't know me. So a lot of it's going to begin by getting past the initial ignorance and say, this is my child, his name is so on and so forth. He's a son, a brother, a boy, an Aspie. Get them to start looking at the humanity of your child.
So you'd advocate a very high level of communication between the school and the parent.
And you know why I do that? Because it's necessary.
Right.
I think big because that's the only acceptable outcome. If I were to stand here and say, oh, this is too difficult, you know, and why am I bothering with this? I'm bothering with it because it's unacceptable. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, members of our community, of our human spectrum, that had darker skin than the majority, were being mistreated because of that difference. And they didn't stand there and say, well, you know, there's a lot more of them than there are of us, and, you know, they got fire hoses, and they got German shepherds and stuff. Bottom line is, the way they were being treated was wrong. So they stood up and said there's only one acceptable outcome, and that is to be treated and respected like fellow human beings. And they didn't stop until. I'm not gonna either. So even when I'm fighting a cold and can barely talk, I'm still gonna have this dialogue because it must take place. I'm on the spectrum, I had a miserable childhood. I'm raising 3 boys, I'm a single dad to my 3 boys on the spectrum. There's no way I am going to live my life and allow them to be treated that way. I'm not gonna allow your kids to be treated that way. It's not acceptable. And it's born of ignorance. It's not born of the fact that there's something wrong with your kids. It's because of that disconnect. It's because the people working with them don't understand them, don't know how to connect with them. So when folks like me who do know how to bridge that gap can facilitate that, that's what I'm here for. And hopefully I got some time on my hands, so I got your back, okay? You wanna say something, bud?
Well, I know this. If you have a child and he turns out to be what you think he was going to be, don't say, oh, you're not what I expected. Just be glad that you have standing in front of you your hope, your life, and your child.
Wow, there's
Yeah.
that.
If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't exist.
And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't know about the Asperger's and I wouldn't be here in front of you. Great.
So we appreciate Zach. Thanks, Zach, for being in your dad's life. You talk about ignorance being the root of it, and I think there's a lot of good intentions, but intentions don't go very far when there's not that deep understanding. And so you come in and you give a 3-hour presentation. Have you have you had success in any other school setting where it goes much deeper than that presentation, that general awareness, where people might say, oh, I think I learned a few things I could take back to the class today, and then, you know, several weeks down the road, that awareness kind of rubs off. I mean, most of the people that I feel have been able to make the accommodations that my daughter may need are people who have somebody in their lives, whether it's a brother, a cousin, a nephew. My sister, I know, is far more patient with many of the kids of my nieces than because of my daughter. You know, and Girl Scout leaders have said, I'm a whole different parent because of your daughter, and things like that. So have you gotten to the point where you really feel like you've been able to affect change? And if not, I'd like to say I'd love for it to start here, and I'd be the first parent to sit down and...
We're actually having that discussion
Okay.
to make it much more ongoing.
Right.
Because the fact of the matter is, you don't get to know any human being in one sitting. Those of you who are married, you feel like you're still learning your spouse? God, I hope so, or you're very bored. So it's not gonna work with a spectrum student either. Because as that child grows and matures and goes up the ranks and the grades, their experiences are gonna change, they're gonna mature, they're gonna grow, they're gonna become different people. Certain strengths may emerge, certain challenges may emerge that weren't present before because that challenge was never challenged. So if they haven't seen it before, if somebody has a right answer, not only should the teacher be validating that person, but the rest of the class should be validating that person too. So they're supporting each other instead of competing with each other. If the class was more like that, do you think these special needs students would be excluded?